Merry meet Annie here. I shall make a declaration to begin this video. It's the topic of the video. I am an American Wiccan. That's something I've called myself now for, I guess, about 10 years or so. Yeah, we all play with this idea of labels and who we are, don't we? At one level, it means absolutely nothing to me what I call myself or anyone else calls themselves. It can be a tool to explore, to see what we have in common and where we're different, but it's not the most important thing to me. But the reason why I wanted to explain why I have and will use this label for myself is I've gotten a lot of questions about it when I have mentioned it in email exchanges and on discussion boards, and when people have dropped me emails here on YouTube. I get questions that are curious and respectful, like, can you explain why you call yourself that? I also get more direct ones, which are a bit accusatory, more along the lines of, explain yourself, because they don't really like the term. And they still might not like the term, even if I take the time to explain what it means to me. Here's what it means to me, and I was reminded in a comment I made on the YouTube Pagan Facebook group when I declared that I was an American Wiccan. I was reminded I had meant to make this video. Here's what it means to me. I've been involved in the community here in the States since the very early 70s, when we really didn't have a bunch of labels to describe who we were, but considering where my training came from and the teachings of my first coven, I would have been what most of you today call BTW, for British Traditional. And that was because I was initiated into a traditional lineage. But over time, I began to have an interesting relationship to what kind of Wiccan I was. Because when the labels started going around later from the traditionalists basically wanting to, establish who they were to other people, that they weren't eclectic, or they weren't, say, reclaiming, or Dianic, or God-centered, or all the different kinds of paganism that started showing up late 70s, early 80s. So we started hanging on to that BTW, because at least it meant that we recognized each other. But the thing is, I live on a different land than where that tradition came from. The tradition was stolen from another land, is another way to put that. The seasons, the climate, the history that moved it and inspired it were of another land, another place, and in many ways another time. Early on, exploring the season that we lived in, which didn't necessarily match exactly to the Wheel of the Year seasons that came over here. For instance, Imbolc is winter where I live. There is nothing spring-like or warming or lightening or brightening about Imbolc. Maybe 6 weeks later or so, it starts getting that way. But the wheel didn't exactly match to the energy of the season where I live. And I know a lot of you appreciate that according to where you live. And I started playing around with that in my head. I didn't know anybody who was considering themselves to be an American Wiccan. So it was something I called myself. However, I have seen it every now and then, probably in the last 10 years or so. And the reason I declare myself to be so is it honors the fact that the traditions that I inherited, that were taught to me, came from another continent. They came from the cultures of the people and the history of the people that were different than the land that I live on. I wanted to honor that the land I live on inspires me as much as any season or any turning of the wheel inspired the people that were the originators of the tradition that I was part of. But I wanted to honor it was different. It was a matter of finding what felt like the indigenous connection to the land I live on. It was also a way of acknowledging that it was related but separate in some ways. I sometimes think that even the god and the goddess that I experience living in a different place and in a different time when they introduced themselves to me has something powerfully to do with the land they arise from. Some traditional Wiccans who practice in the United States, or any part of the Americas, firmly believe that the gods they connect to are the exact same energy that was tied to the sources that tie us to another land and another time. I honor and respect that. It's always felt that I connected to an aspect of them that was of this place and the history of this place. I couldn't connect to them at the level of my genealogy, my history, my bloodline, because I come from several different places in my family's history. The first time I really started exploring what this meant to me was when a coven mate from my first circle, who was adopted, had no clue what his ethnic, cultural heritage was. And we started having discussions about what connects us to the place traditional Wicca came from, and what connected us to it as it felt to us here in this truly new land for that particular practice, those particular sets of beliefs. Calling myself an American Wiccan ties me to the land that I live on and the spirits and energy of it that I align to and work with. It also connects me to a slightly different feeling of who God and Goddess are. It also connects me with a sense of comfort with the fact that my heritage is mixed, that what most American practitioners bring, if indeed they are lovers of the land, deeply connected in a shamanic and spiritual way to the land we live on here, not where our forebears came from, but here, that we find that we are in touch with the way this land presents itself and the way the gods have walked upon it. We cannot claim to be indigenous to this continent, most of us, because most of us are not native to this continent. But the way we feel it powerfully and strongly, in the way it connects us to the land, to the energies of the land, to the gods of the land, to me is a specifically American experience. Just as our practitioners in various places in the southern hemisphere connect to something perfect and beautiful and powerful that is unique to the land they live on and the energies and the gods of that land. Just as those who established the traditions that sparked this Wiccan movement were tied to another land and another place in England and Ireland, specific energies of the land, specific history, roots, specific spiritual energy, the energy of the gods as they make themselves known to them. So, when I declare I am an American Wiccan, it is not to separate myself out as different from someone who does not call themselves that, whether they're American or they live someplace else in the world. It is to honor that that tradition is so powerful. The way I learned it was pure. My priest was only second, what you would call generation in the lineage of my tradition here in the United States. So you could say that our Wicca was kind of fresh off the boat, or fresh off of an airplane, or however it got here. But it became, to me, something unique and perfect in that you blended that with the place and the time we lived, along with that fascinating mix that we Americans tend to be, of many cultures, many ethnic experiences. To me, it honors that every one of us, no matter where we live, have certain things powerfully in common if we declare that we are Wiccan. But we also have something particularly strong in common with other Wiccans of our own land and our own time, if indeed we are each practitioners who are that deeply connected, so deeply rooted in what is, for most of us, this new land. I hope that's an explanation for those of you who either kindly ask me to explain why I say that, And maybe it will satisfy those of you who are more explicit in explain yourself, which triggered this particular video because I had that succinct of an email recently from someone. It was along the lines of, "This American Wiccan thing you claim to be, explain yourself," with an exclamation point. I can't make it as dramatic as that. It doesn't. But now, you might know a little bit about why I find it empowering to say that, and at the same time respectful of the tradition I was originally taught in and the inspiration of where it was rooted. Probably there is a more important conversation here, and that conversation is probably the feeling of being tied deeply to a land which is not the land of your ancestors. Feeling a connection as if you were indigenous to the place that you are rooted. Honoring the importance of place and the way that place feels like it responds to you, indeed embraces you. That's probably the part of the conversation that matters. I wish you mirth and reverence. Mary Part.